Hello, this week I'm working on an illustration. I was hoping to finish a sewing project in time for today's video, but unfortunately it just didn't come together in time and I didn't want to rush it. So I hope to be able to share that with you in the future, but today we're doing an illustration. My initial thought was to create an illustration as a background and then crochet a little character that could stand around in front, and I thought that would be really cute, but unfortunately I didn't have time to crochet a character. So today it's just the illustration. I'm starting off with the line work, and I tried to add a lot of little details that I thought would be interesting and give the piece character. In the areas where two lines intersect, I like to add some extra ink to create a sense of shadow and depth. I also added a lot of little cracks and lines throughout the piece to give the eye something more to look at. The inspiration for this piece was the French Riviera. I wanted to make an old, rustic, charming building that had bricks and stones on the outside and a lovely planter box. And here I'm just adding some grain to give some texture to the planter box so it looks a little bit more like wood. And here I'm starting the plants by outlining them in colored pencil. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm a really big fan of those Mickey Mouse shorts that have been showing up on YouTube. The way they do their foliage is just so beautiful to me. Instead of outlining them in the same black line that they use to outline the characters and the buildings, they outline them a lot of times with colors. And so the outlines blend in a little bit more with the colors, and it just gives a softer and almost a little bit more whimsical look to it. And so that's the look I was trying to go for here. The plan was to outline the plants and then go back and color them in with watercolor and then use gouache to do some final highlights and little touches here at the end. And unfortunately, it didn't quite go that well. The outline of the plants was a little bit disappointing to me. Those blue things that are supposed to be leaves, they look like surfboards. And the other leaves just look crazy, and it just wasn't quite coming out right. And at this point I was trying not to panic because I thought, that's okay, I'll just watercolor it and I'm sure that it'll start to look better. Well, I started to watercolor it and it did not look better. And I think this is partially a mistake on my end in terms of the technique, because the watercolor was just too thick. I should have added more water or less pigment, and I should have built the color up in layers rather than just having one big gloopy layer in the beginning. The pigment was just too much, and the washes were really splotchy, and they were so dark, so that when I went back later to try to add some shadow to different parts of the leaves, I just could not achieve the darkness and the intensity that I was looking for because the initial wash was so thick. giving up on that for a while, I decided to move on to bricks. I wanted to make them a sort of a terracotta color, but because I had already made the plants so saturated, I wanted to go with a more desaturated look. And so I'm just doing a really, really light wash of a very light pinkish color. I thought it would be nice because it reminds me of some of those houses out there in, I've never been to the French Riviera actually, so I don't know. So in my imagination, the houses in the French Riviera, I guess I could have looked up a picture, but I didn't. So in my imagination, there are cute little pink houses out in the French Riviera, and this is one of them. So here I've gone back and I'm trying to add in that shadow and depth. I gave up on the watercolor and I said, I'll just go ahead and I'll add it in with the pencil. And I actually didn't mind this look. I was feeling a bit cheered at this point because I thought, okay, I like the texture, I like the depth. I didn't think it looked too bad, but I just didn't know how to remedy the part that was not in shadow. And so I moved back to the blue leaves and I wanted them to have kind of a purplish tone. I've been working on making the foliage not just green, but being a little bit more whimsical and doing some different colors. After that, I moved back to the bricks and I wanted to give them a little bit more texture. Usually bricks have some different variations in colors to them, and so I tried making some gradients by adding an extra layer to the edges of the bricks and then making it less and less toward the middle to give a little bit more texture. And here I'm just going back to color the planter box, adding texture here too to make it look a little bit more like wood. And this is the point where I finally went back to the foliage and I thought, forget the watercolors, we're doing gouache for the rest of this. I really thought that the gouache would save me, and it just did not. I'm even less experienced with gouache than I am with watercolor, so I don't know why I thought that this would be my saving grace, but it was not at this point. And so I just kept going thinking, surely I'll just put down this first coat and then I'll come back and outline it later and maybe that will help, maybe that'll make it look good. Well, I did go back and start outlining it later and it did not look good. And so I just tried to work with the gouache a little bit, see what I could do, tried it on a couple of different plants, and it just never quite came together. So at this point, I went and decided to use Posca pens. I was just going to color over all the plants that I had already made with the Posca pens, and so I just wanted to add a little bit of color in the window to give the appearance of glass. I didn't even bother to go down into the plant area because I knew that all of that had to be covered. So here we have the Posca pens. I decided to do 2 layers of just very simple bushes, a back layer that was going to be a darker green color, and then a front layer that was going to be a lighter green color. And I really enjoyed using these Posca pens. I love the idea of using something like you would use a marker, but it's actually paint coming out. The only 2 things that I really struggle with Posca pens are the way that it tears up the paper, so it creates this pilling effect that is not the most appealing. And this is not a Posca pen issue, but just the sets that I have, the nibs are really thick. And so you can't get a really good fine line with these ones, which is why I went with a very simple generic shape for the bushes, because I can't do little tiny leaves with these. And so I was a little bit sad to be covering all this hard work up. I actually didn't think the leaves looked horrible. I just really couldn't figure out how to make them work. And I think if I had more time, if I'd started earlier, maybe I could have made it work. But at this point, I just was running out of time and I needed to do something. So this is what I did. Finally, for the background, I went through and added some shading just to give a little bit more depth to make the bricks around the window look like they were popping out from the wall instead of being part of the wall. Then I thought it would be fun to add some little eyes in the cracks just to make it look like there were little creatures that were hiding there looking out. And finally, I worked on the character. I didn't really have a lot of thought to what I wanted the character to be. Generally, I like short, round, chubby characters, and so that's what this is. And I wanted to pull in some of the colors from the planter box area to this part. I didn't want to mimic them exactly, but I just wanted to hint at them. So we have a cool blue-green color for the pants, and then we're gonna have a little bit of a warmer, greener color for the shirt. And I just made the hair and the face really simple, something that I could finish quick, but that would be really nice. And here is the finished piece. It's nothing like what I was trying to do, but it's something.